Namaskar and welcome once again to the World View. You're watching Dialogus with me, Vishal Dahiya. Today we're going to talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. Now recently, first direct high-level talks between Russia and Ukraine since the beginning of a Russian offensive in February 2022 and a 2-hour-long phone call between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his US counterpart Trump have failed to yield any positive results on ceasefire or further action on peace talks. Now, key disagreements include Russia's demand for Ukraine to withdraw troops from certain regions and recognize them as Russian territory, while Ukraine and its European allies are seeking an unconditional ceasefire. President Trump's administration is not very keen on continuing its relentless military support for Ukraine, and its diplomatic efforts to end the war also seem to lack the heft to bring Russia to the negotiating table. Meanwhile, European Union and Britain have gone ahead with its sanctions plan against Russia without waiting for the United States' response. So what's really happening behind the scenes in Russia-Ukraine war? Is there any possibility of an end to this war? And what is at stake for various players involved in this conflict? For more on this, we're joined by two distinguished experts. Let me first introduce them to you. Former Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar and Professor HarshVPant, who is Vice President Studies and Foreign Policy at ORF, are joining us. Welcome both of you gentlemen to the World View. Let me begin with you, Ambassador Sajjanhar, and let's start by taking an overview of this conflict, this war which some say is the longest and the bloodiest war in Europe's history.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vishal. It's always such a great pleasure and, delighted to connect with you after a very, very long time. So thank you very much for the kind invitation. You're very right. Meaning this war started in February of 22. And at that time, it was thought that it was going to be over in just a few weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks, maximum a month. And that Ukraine will crumble against the military might of Russia. You would recall at that time also, Boris Johnson used to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And within the first 2 days, he had offered asylum to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy because, it was the expectation that Ukraine would not be would be able to stand up to the Russian military incursion. And within 4 days, it was Mr. Biden, who was the President of the United States. He offered asylum. But then historical words from President Zelenskyy, he said, I don't want a ride, I want arms. And that's what he's been getting. But still, all that notwithstanding, that heroic beginning on the part of Ukraine notwithstanding, it's been going on. There has been this offensive. First, Russia was able to make inroads. Then Ukraine, around the end of 22, was able to hit back. It was thought, that there was, I think it's vivid in the memories of everyone who's been watching this row of 64 kilometers in which, the tanks were, the Russian tanks had been positioned, and it was thought that it was just a matter of time that they would be able to go and take over Kiev. Anyway, today now we are really exactly 3 years and 3 months as of date today. And the conflict seems to have wound down to a stalemate. I think the initial estimations, initial assessments of both sides, whether it was Russia, that it will be able to, overwhelm Ukraine, and it would be able to take over Kiev very, very quickly. That has not appeared to be true. That is not, assessment was way off the mark. Also, the assessment of NATO countries, of Europe, that by putting all these sanctions, they will be able to get Russia on its knees. That also has not proven
Materialized.
So what we see is that the Russian economy, although it has been bruised, although it has been harmed, but it is still standing strong, and it has found takers, buyers for its oil in the global market. And as far as Ukraine is concerned, it has been battered beyond anyone's imagination or belief. And yes, I don't know whether the bloodiest war ever on the European continent, but definitely the bloodiest war since the end of the Second World War, 1945. And no one had really expected that this sort of a war could come on the European territory.
Mhm.
So I think it has come really to a stalemate because Ukraine is not willing to give up. The notwithstanding what you mentioned very correctly, Vishal, that America has been withdrawing. It has not fully behind Ukraine in terms of its fight against Russia. Mr. Trump is cozying up to Mr. Putin. You mentioned about the 2 hour long telephonic conversation. That has
Mhm.
not yielded any positive result either on the battlefield or in terms of diplomatic parleys. So
Okay.
I think it is a stalemate, but with advantage Russia. And that is why maybe Russia is putting all these preconditions before it comes to the negotiating table.
Okay, okay. Fair enough assessment out there, Mr. Sajjanhar. Let me bring in Professor Pant also. Professor Pant, would you outrightly agree with the sum up of Mr. Sajjanhar's statement here that it looks like a stalemate, but with an edge to Russia? Also, given the fact that past 3 years and 3 months in this conflict seemingly has been a kind of a seesaw battle between both sides. Both sides having made miscalculations, having made erroneous judgment, having made some gains as well, but then suffered losses also. Is it actually at a stalemate stage now? And if it's so, then why don't both sides come to an agreement?
Yeah, Vishal, I think it has been this conflict, this war has upended so many assumptions about the way I think most of us thought wars would be fought and how interstate relations would be governed in the 21st century. That it almost looks as if we are back to the future. The old assumptions about the dominance of military power. I think all of it started from what happened between Russia and Ukraine and what continues to be played out on the battlefield. I think at this point, certainly neither of the two sides can claim that they have been dominant on the battlefield since the conflict started, and there has been this, as you described it, a seesaw battle between the two sides, trying to both do make some gains on the battlefield, but also shape the global narrative,
Mhm.
in terms of who will come out eventually as the winner. But certainly, when you think of uh, the one most important factor in this conflict, it turns out that American resolve, American response, American agenda setting remains a big driver for both sides, because once you have America on either side, you can also shape the narrative. So initially it was that American-led NATO forces are supporting Ukraine on the battlefield, resulted in not only Ukraine claiming a moral high ground, but also Ukraine delivering some devastating blows to the Russian military might. And then I think once the realization dawned that it does not really have the appetite, that American body politic does not really support the Ukraine enterprise as much as perhaps Ukraine wanted. Then I think you saw an entire array of actors shifting their response accordingly. And today we are in a position where Mr. Trump has not been able to convincingly convey what actually he wants out of this conflict. He came up with these big ideas. In 24 hours, I'm going to resolve this conflict. He came up with this big narrative. Some of his supporters said, oh, this is this great Nixonian moment where he's going to take Russians away from China and thereby break the duopoly and thereby shape the global balance of power. I think he must be realizing that it is, once wars start, once they attain a momentum of their own, it is not very easy to change the trajectory of that conflict. And I think fundamentally, you are stuck in a situation where Russians believe that Russians have the momentum on the battlefield. They would want to make as many gains as possible on insofar as territorial acquisition is concerned. They perhaps then can sit and do some talking about it. The
Okay.
Ukrainians, of course, are weaker side. Ukrainians believe that ultimately it's a question of their national honor. So they will continue to use nationalism as a, as the most potent weapon and move ahead. But certainly this, I think we have moved to a point where in one way or another, it has to move, it has to go either side. But again, given where we are coming from, and given that we are into the, as was pointed out, 3 years and 3 months into the conflict, I think it's very difficult to say with any degree of certainty that we are going to see an outcome which might be called a stable peace in the in this conflict. We may achieve a cessation of hostilities at the best, which perhaps what Mr. Trump wants. But I think what is evident that he's frustrated, that he's not able to gain on insofar as this conflict is concerned. And you are seeing other actors positioning themselves very, very interestingly. So Europeans are signaling that they are willing to move ahead. And of course, Ukraine and Russia are sending their own messages. So I do think that we are at a point where perhaps a new script will have to be written for this conflict.
Okay, you're right there. It looks like in this theater of war between Russia and Ukraine, nobody seems to be listening to anybody, be it the allies on one side or be it the adversaries, that is Russia and Ukraine as well. We'll come to the European part there a bit later, Professor Pant. But let me first bring in, Mr. Sajjanhar here. And Mr. Sajjanhar, let's go a little bit back in the time, not much, maybe perhaps a decade and a half. If we look at the essence or the main reason behind the Russia-Ukraine conflict is Russia's objection to Ukraine's increasing relationship or willingness to go ahead and join NATO, which is led by United States and has several other European nations as its member as well. Now, the reason why I'm pointing out this root cause is because if we now look at today's situation, it looks like, as Professor Pant was also pointing out, the United States, without having fought in the battle directly, seems to have been at a greater loss than anybody else, because they seemingly have not lived up to the expectations of, staying true to Ukraine by recently, of course, going back on their promise of providing relentless support in terms of weapons and armory. Of course, it happened in the first 2.5 years, but with Trump 2.0. Also, the duopoly, which Professor Pant was referring to, Russia, China, that also seemingly is very intact. They're not able to bring Russia to the table. They're not able to seek any considerations from Russia at this point in time. So, Mr. Sajjanhar, does it look like a failure of United States diplomacy, or it's basically the reason that United States and President Trump's administration does not have any heart in this conflict now?
Yeah, you've raised some very interesting questions, Vishal, and let me try to respond to, as many of them as I possibly can. First you made this comment that the whole conflict started because Russia, meaning that is its avowed position, because Ukraine was, being made a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it didn't want, its borders to Russia's borders with Europe to have any country which was a member of NATO, because that would pose a direct threat to its own security. But you see, after 3 years, what we see is that when we started the whole process in 22, there were 30 members of NATO. Today, there are 32 members of NATO. So has Russia really been able to get its objectives fulfilled, that it has been able to push back against NATO? You have Finland, which right from Second World War, it had maintained this ambiguity about it was a member of the Western liberal system, but not joining the alliance, and so much that even Sweden, which did not share borders with Russia, that was also not becoming member of the NATO. But right now, both of them, because they feel this threat. But, possibly the other, let me put it this way also, that subsequently, even before the conflict started, Mr. Putin had stated very categorically that Ukraine does not have, it is not a natural country, and it doesn't have a right to exist as an independent, separate nation. It has always been a part of, what is called Kievsky Rus. The Russian origins started from Kiev, which is, the capital of Ukraine.
Indeed, indeed. They're very, very strong cultural ties there.
No, cultural ties, all right. But there are very strong cultural ties between different countries. But then you don't demand that that country doesn't have a right to exist. Many of these Islamic states, they have very strong cultural bonds. Many of the, states in Europe, they have very strong cultural bonds. But it doesn't mean that you deny the other country the right and the possibility to exist as an independent state. So I think one is that particular dichotomy that we have to keep in mind. And, I have had the opportunity not only of working in that region, but recent years, even after the conflict, traveling to all these regions. And, there is these countries which became independent from the Soviet Union in 1991, and some of them, like the Baltic states, they fought valiantly for their independence. There is a very genuine, deep-seated, deep-rooted fear of the Russian Federation because of their historical legacies, because of the historical past that, Russia will come over. So I don't know how accurate, whether this was a rationalization, because some of the arguments that were made by Russia was that there is a there's Nazification of Ukraine, and we have to denazify it, we have to demilitarize it, meaning having such a control over the what the other country stands for. But that was in terms of some of the comments that you made. Now, as far as the United States having a heart into it, fully supporting Ukraine or not, I think we have to be mindful that these are democracies. And democracies, although, when Mr. Biden had traveled to Kiev from Warsaw, he had said, we are going to be with Ukraine for as long as it takes. This is the commitment and of the United States. It was not commitment of an individual that was given. But then, of course, leaders change, elections take place, and new leaders will have their own policy, and that is what we have seen. Now, ostensibly, it is said that what Mr. Trump wants it again to sort of, have a reverse Nixon on China. That, what Nixon was able to do in early 1970s to wean away China from the Soviet Union, he wants to do the same thing. But I think, as far it is, in my view, very difficult, if not absolutely impossible, to, so to say, wean away Russia from the orbit of China. We remember what happened in 22, when in February, Mr. Putin had visited Beijing just before the Winter Olympics, and he says, ours is a no-limit partnership. And this is what we have seen happening over these last 3+ years. So I think it's very difficult to wean away. Of course, strengthen the engagement between Russia and USA. I think Russia and Europe is going to be that much more difficult, but Russia and USA. And the last point that I want to make here is that, it is stated, Mr. Trump wants to extricate himself from Europe so that he can pay much greater attention as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned.
Mr. Sajjanhar, we'll come to that US versus Europe part there as well. But since we're continuing with, trying to understand the United States approach here, Professor Pant, quick comment from you on this part. As Mr. Sajjanhar has put forth, and you were also pointing out, does it look like that the United States diplomacy is lacking in its efforts, or they're unable to find a way out?
No, I think at this point it does look, a bit confused to an outsider. If you are a partner of the US, I think a lot of the changes have been so dramatic that in the US and in America's approach to the world, that it becomes very difficult to frame your response accordingly. So I do think that for Ukrainians in particular, if you are fighting a war based on this assumption that a lot of your resources, a lot of your material support is going to come from one of your partners, then I think it's a serious matter for them that Americans and American policy has moved from one end of the spectrum to another. And certainly it looks that Mr. Trump's approach to Mr. Putin is much more conciliatory than his approach to Ukraine, which looks much more extractive in nature, wherein not only is Mr. Zelenskyy berated in front of everyone in the Oval Office, but also you end up signing a minerals agreement with a country that is already under duress. So it does not convey a great sense of either respect or in some ways commitment to the cause. And I
Okay.
do think that is an issue which I think will have grave repercussions and is already having particularly on Europe. And I think, Ambassador Sajjanhar mentioned a lot of very interesting points about how NATO is expanded, and Finland and Sweden are also have joined NATO. And I think for Europe, this is fundamentally now a question of the future of the European security architecture. It's not simply a question of this war being fought and how this is being fought, how this will be contained, etc. It's now a much larger issue. And one of the most significant changes in this regard, in particular in Europe, that we are witnessing, is not only this idea that we need to be strategically autonomous, but what would that entail? So when a country like Germany, for example, says that we are going to rearm, we are going to enhance our defense budget, we are going to be a proactive security player, it is a fundamental shift in the way Europe is looking at the world. Europe is looking at its security, and Europe is looking at transatlantic partnership. You have heard it now repeatedly from a number of European leaders that, look, the old assumptions about transatlantic relationship no longer hold. And I do think that one of the most long-standing changes or consequences of this war in Europe, I think, is going to be this resurgence of Germany as a military player. And we don't have very much back in history to recognize when Germany rises in Europe, what all it ends up doing. So I think the Russia-German rivalry is going to be the central pivot around which a lot of the conversations perhaps in the future are likely to revolve.
Okay. Ambassador Sajjanhar, you were earlier also mentioning Europe and the changes in Europe as well. But to understand it in a much better way, when we're talking about Europe and the United States of America in the earlier wars in European continent, be it World War I, World War II, every other conflict as well, then came NATO, even in other multilateral organizations like United Nations, we've seen the bonhomie between, several European countries and United States acting as allies, the Gulf War, action against Iraq, 2 wars being fought there. Question is, are they drifting away? The European nations, the prominent European nations and United States of America, despite being part of NATO together, are they drifting away now because of their own interests and it's like everybody for themselves?
Yeah, I think fascinating question, Vishal. I think, the transatlantic partnership has really been the fulcrum. It has been the pivot of the Western liberal order that has prevailed since the Second World War till just now. But I think there have been some reassessments on the part of the United States that, the manner in which the world has evolved over the last 20, 30 years or so, it has not been to its interests. Although, it was the opportunity as far as the US is concerned to shape the world in the manner it wanted when it became a unipolar world in the 1990s. But then it was, it completely, muffed up those chances. It didn't really. And on the contrary, the late 90s led to the 9/11, which was again a huge shock as far as the, primacy of the United States in the world. So let me put it this way, that this bond, the strength, the dynamism, the vigorousness, vitality of the transatlantic partnership is coming down. But I would at this moment not venture to say that they are drifting apart. As you can see, the Europeans have imposed new sanctions even without what the United States is doing. Just a few days back, we saw major European leaders, whether it is the German Chancellor, President of France, UK Prime Minister, Poland Prime Minister, etc., all of them traveling without
Kiev, yeah.
any support from US as such. So I think the Europeans are also starting to live and survive without the umbrella of the United States. United States will continue to be important as far as technology is concerned, market is concerned, etc. But I think on the security aspects, the Europeans will have to start learning to put in much more funding, research, technology, production to make themselves self-sufficient. It's going to take some time. So I think this branching out will be gradual, but I think it is definitely it is seen that it is going to happen.
Okay, okay. So a gradual movement out there being witnessed. But Professor Pant, you were also earlier talking about European nations, Germany specifically, seeming the one nation which might come up as the leader in Europe, and increasingly its voice is becoming shriller with each passing day on each important issue which is being discussed at the global stage. My question is regarding Britain. What happens? Because Britain is not part of European Union. They are working in tandem with the EU. So long, for all these years, since World War II, they have been a very close ally of United States. Will they be stuck in a sort of a dichotomous situation here? Which way to go, or is it look like does it look like they'll end up being the one doing the catching up part here?
No, I think Britain is also has been defined by its domestic politics in more ways than one. So if you go back to the Conservatives and how they shaped the whole debate on Brexit, how they wanted to be away from a European Union, we have seen a bit of a turnaround there. The Starmer government is much more conciliatory, has just signed a deal with European Union in terms of how to manage the future of this relationship. It's going to be a UK-EU partnership, which will allow greater flexibility when it comes to movement of people. So in a sense, there is certainly some reassessment happening in Britain also, but it is also being defined by the Labour government taking a call on how to renegotiate the terms of their engagement with EU. Of course, they continue to invest significantly in their ties with the US as well. But I think by and large, this sense that, look, America of today is very different, and the assumptions on which a lot of the policies were being framed, that was the great partnership with the Americans, that has to be reassessed. And I think that reassessment is happening in Britain. That reassessment will continue to shape its approach towards EU, as we have seen with this recent deal. And I think that is where they will continue to also support Ukraine. So you do see a very strong support for Ukraine in the body politic of UK, which is again very striking, because I think Europeans as a whole have decided that whatever actions or whatever policy options America might pursue, they will have to be on a different wicket, given that it's the future of their security that is at stake here. Americans may withdraw, perhaps Americans may not withdraw, but Americans would not be the same guarantor of European security as they were in the past.
Okay, so clearly, it looks like there seems to be a lot at stake for all the players, starting from both Russia and Ukraine in this long ongoing war between these two nations, be it the allies on the Ukrainian side, and the sort of seeming rift between the allies is also indicative of a lot of geopolitical twists and turns which already have taken place and which might also take place in the near future. Thank you so much, gentlemen, Ambassador Sajjanhar and Professor Pant, for sharing your valuable views and insights with us and our viewers. We'll come back again with more insights on this, of course, war, once the solutions are in sight, or at least there is some movement on this part, and various other geopolitical issues as well. Thank you again, both of you, and thank you, viewers, for watching Dialogues. Stay tuned.